The laughter echoed through the luxury showroom, bouncing off polished marble floors and glass walls that reflected million-dollar dreams. It was supposed to be just another joke, another harmless tease from a powerful CEO who had everything money could buy. But within seconds, every smile in the room disappeared. The single father standing beside the gleaming white Porsche slowly lifted the rear hood, stared into the engine bay, and froze. His weathered hands, stained by years of honest labor, trembled ever so slightly as memories he had buried long ago came rushing back. Whatever he had just seen wasn't simply an engine problem. It was a doorway to a past that had stolen everything from him. Before we continue this unforgettable journey, take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, share it with someone who still believes kindness can change lives, and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Every act of support helps us bring more emotional stories filled with hope, second chances, and humanity. Nobody inside the showroom knew who Daniel Carter really was. To them, he was simply another mechanic wearing faded blue overalls, boots covered with grease, and eyes that looked permanently exhausted. They saw a man who fixed cars because he had no other choice. They didn't see the father who woke before sunrise every morning to prepare breakfast for his 10-year-old daughter, Lily, before dropping her off at school. They didn't see the widower who still whispered good night to a photograph of his late wife every evening after putting his daughter to bed. They certainly didn't know that before life crushed him beneath unbearable grief, Daniel had once been considered one of the brightest automotive engineers of his generation. Life has a strange way of hiding extraordinary people beneath ordinary clothes. Across the showroom stood Victoria Sinclair, the 38-year-old CEO of Sinclair Automotive Holdings. Every magazine celebrated her as one of the youngest women to build a billion-dollar automotive empire. Investors admired her intelligence. Journalists admired her confidence. Employees respected her demanding standards. Yet almost nobody knew how lonely success could become when every relationship eventually turned into a business transaction. Victoria had come to inspect one of the rarest Porsche classics ever restored for a private collector. The car was worth several $1,000,000, and every detail had to be perfect before delivery. Unfortunately, perfection wasn't cooperating. The legendary sports car refused to start. Senior technicians surrounded it with laptops, scanners, and diagnostic equipment worth more than most people's homes. They replaced sensors. They reset software. They checked every electrical connection. Hours passed without answers. Growing impatient, Victoria crossed her arms while dozens of employees nervously watched. Then someone quietly suggested calling the independent mechanic from a small neighborhood garage nearby. Daniel arrived nearly 40 minutes later. His old pickup truck looked almost embarrassing parked beside rows of luxury vehicles. Some employees exchanged amused glances before he even stepped inside. One young technician whispered that this wasn't the place for backyard mechanics. Daniel heard every word. He simply smiled. Years of hardship had taught him that pride never repaired broken engines. Victoria looked him up and down. There was nothing impressive about him on the surface. His sleeves were worn, his toolbox looked decades old. His hands carried scars earned through thousands of repairs. Trying to lighten the tense atmosphere, Victoria smiled and jokingly announced that if this mysterious mechanic could somehow fix the impossible Porsche that had defeated her entire engineering team, maybe she'd marry him herself. Everyone laughed, everyone except Daniel. He wasn't offended. He simply nodded politely before walking toward the car. The showroom gradually fell silent. Daniel ignored the expensive diagnostic computers. Instead, he closed his eyes for a brief moment. Then he placed his hand gently against the rear of the Porsche. It almost looked as though he was greeting an old friend. Slowly, he opened the engine compartment. The instant he looked inside, everything changed. His face lost its color. He reached toward a tiny metal plate hidden beneath the intake manifold. There, almost invisible beneath decades of dust and restoration work, sat 3 tiny engraved initials: ACM. Daniel's breathing became uneven. Nobody understood why. Victoria asked whether something was wrong. Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, his fingers gently traced the engraving, as though touching a forgotten piece of history. 22 years earlier, While studying advanced automotive engineering in Germany, Daniel had worked alongside a brilliant mentor named Professor Arthur Michelson. Together, they had secretly developed an experimental engine cooling modification, unlike anything Porsche had ever officially approved. Only 3 prototype engines had ever received the hidden initials ACM Professor Arthur, Carter Daniel, Michelson, their initials. The project disappeared after a mysterious laboratory fire destroyed nearly every record. Professor Michelson died shortly afterward. Daniel believed every prototype had been lost forever. Yet somehow, one was sitting directly in front of him. The realization hit like lightning. This wasn't merely a luxury sports car, it was a forgotten chapter of his own life. Victoria watched the mechanic's expression carefully. She had spent years learning how to read people during billion-dollar negotiations. The emotion on Daniel's face couldn't be faked. Curiosity replaced skepticism. Daniel carefully examined the engine for several more minutes before quietly asking whether anyone had modified the fuel delivery system during restoration. The lead technicians confidently insisted everything matched factory specifications. Daniel gently shook his head. Factory specifications were exactly the problem. This wasn't a factory engine anymore. No scanner in the world would ever diagnose the issue because the car wasn't built according to official engineering diagrams. Using nothing more than a flashlight, a small screwdriver, and years of forgotten knowledge, Daniel removed a hidden panel almost nobody knew existed. Behind it lay a tiny pressure valve installed during the experimental project decades ago. The rubber seal had hardened with age. Fuel pressure dropped only after reaching operating temperature. The car would never start consistently. Every expensive diagnostic computer had completely missed it. Daniel improvised a temporary seal using a small gasket from his old toolbox. He reassembled everything. Without fanfare, he turned the key. The Porsche roared to life instantly. The sound filled the showroom like music. Employees stared in disbelief. Some actually applauded. Others simply stood speechless. Victoria herself couldn't hide her astonishment. But Daniel wasn't celebrating. He remained staring quietly at the engine. Because repairing it had awakened something far more valuable than professional satisfaction. It reminded him of the man he used to be. Years earlier, after losing his wife Emily to a sudden illness, Daniel abandoned engineering completely. The dreams he once chased no longer mattered. His only remaining purpose became raising Lily. He sold nearly everything, accepted work as a neighborhood mechanic, stopped publishing research, stopped attending conferences, stopped believing life still had plans for him. Now standing beside the Porsche, forgotten memories slowly returned. Victoria invited Daniel into her office. The room overlooked the city skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. She expected to discuss payment. Instead, she found herself listening to a story she never imagined hearing. Daniel explained the initials, the university, the research. The professor who believed engineering should improve lives instead of simply creating faster luxury cars. Victoria listened without interrupting. For perhaps the first time in years, she wasn't thinking like a CEO. She was simply listening to another human being. When Daniel finished, silence settled over the room. Finally, Victoria asked one simple question. If everything you said is true, why are you fixing family sedans in a tiny garage? Daniel smiled sadly. Because little girls still need fathers after their mothers are gone. Those words struck Victoria harder than any business presentation ever could. Money had taught her how to calculate profits. It had never taught her how to measure sacrifice. Over the following weeks, Victoria couldn't stop thinking about Daniel. She quietly researched his past. Everything checked out. His academic papers had once been cited across Europe. Several patents listed his name. Former colleagues described him as a genius destined to reshape automotive engineering. Then, nothing. It was as though he had disappeared from history. One rainy afternoon, Victoria decided to visit Daniel's modest garage without announcing herself. She expected to find an ordinary repair shop. Instead, she witnessed something unforgettable. Daniel wasn't simply repairing vehicles. He was teaching neighborhood teenagers mechanical skills free of charge after school. Young people from struggling families gathered every afternoon to learn responsibility, discipline, and confidence. Old engines became classrooms. Broken transmissions became lessons about patience. Each repaired vehicle represented another teenager discovering self-worth. Lily sat nearby doing homework while occasionally handing her father tools with a bright smile. Nobody noticed Victoria standing quietly outside. She watched for nearly an hour. Not once did Daniel raise his voice. Every mistake became another opportunity to teach. Every success belonged to the students rather than himself. Driving home that evening, Victoria realized something uncomfortable. She had spent years building a billion-dollar company. Daniel had quietly been building people. Weeks later, Sinclair Automotive announced a nationwide engineering fellowship honoring forgotten innovators. Nobody knew the program existed because of one humble mechanic. Daniel initially refused every offer. He insisted he wasn't interested in returning to corporate life. Victoria respected his decision. Instead, she proposed something entirely different. She wanted him to design educational workshops connecting experienced mechanics with disadvantaged teenagers across the country. Not executives. Not investors, real mechanics teaching real skills. Daniel hesitated. For the first time since Emily's passing, the future felt possible instead of frightening. Lily noticed the change immediately. Her father laughed more, smiled more, dreamed again. Evenings once filled with silence slowly became filled with conversations about engines, inventions, and possibilities. Months passed. The fellowship transformed hundreds of young lives. Several graduates earned engineering scholarships. Others opened successful repair businesses. Many simply gained confidence they never believed possible. Daniel never sought recognition. He only wanted opportunities for young people who reminded him of himself. Victoria often visited the workshops. The playful joke she once made inside the showroom eventually became something both of them laughed about together. Life, however, had already given each of them something far more meaningful than romance. It had given them purpose. Daniel rediscovered the calling grief had buried beneath years of survival. Victoria discovered that true leadership isn't measured by stock prices, but by how many people rise because someone believed in them. If this story has touched your heart so far, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to support more stories that remind us kindness is never wasted. Before we reach the ending, leave a comment below with these words. Second chances change lives. We'd love to know how many people still believe that one act of kindness can rewrite someone's future. 1 year after that unforgettable day in the showroom, Daniel stood before hundreds of graduating engineering students invited by Sinclair Automotive. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit. He wore the same humble smile and the same hands marked by years of honest work. Behind him stood Lily, now proudly watching the father she had always believed was extraordinary. Daniel looked across the audience and realized something beautiful. The Porsche had never truly been broken. Neither had he. Both had simply needed someone willing to look beneath the surface instead of relying on appearances. Sometimes life hides miracles beneath grease-covered hands. Sometimes the greatest experts arrive in old pickup trucks. Sometimes the strongest people are quietly raising children while carrying invisible heartbreak. And sometimes, what begins as a careless joke becomes the moment that restores an entire life. Because in the end, engines can be repaired, fortunes can be earned, and companies can be built, but nothing is more powerful than discovering your purpose again after believing it was lost forever. The graduation ceremony marked the beginning of something none of them had expected. News outlets covered Daniel Carter's remarkable journey from a forgotten neighborhood mechanic to the man inspiring a new generation of engineers. But while cameras focused on his achievements, Daniel quietly returned to his small garage the very next morning, rolling up the same faded sleeves and greeting every customer with the same humble smile. Fame had knocked on his door, but humility remained the one guest he refused to send away. People from every corner of the country began bringing unusual vehicles to his garage, hoping the legendary mechanic would solve problems no one else could. Daniel accepted only a handful each month. The rest of his time was still devoted to teaching teenagers, because he believed fixing young lives mattered far more than fixing expensive machines. Victoria Sinclair noticed something remarkable about him. Success hadn't changed him. If anything, it had made him even more determined to stay grounded. Every afternoon, after finishing at the garage, Daniel hurried home to cook dinner with Lily. They laughed over burnt pancakes, argued playfully about homework, and ended every evening exactly the same way, reading one chapter from Emily's old journal. The diary Lily's mother had written before she passed away. One evening, Lily looked at her father while holding the worn notebook against her chest. She quietly admitted that for years she had been afraid he would stop smiling forever. Daniel felt tears welling in his eyes. He realized that while he had spent years trying to protect his daughter from grief, she had been silently trying to protect him as well. That realization changed everything. A few weeks later, Victoria invited Daniel to Sinclair Automotive headquarters again, but this time there were no broken cars waiting. Instead, hundreds of employees filled the main auditorium. Engineers, executives, interns, mechanics, janitors, and receptionists all sat together. Victoria stepped onto the stage. She spoke about innovation. She spoke about technology. Then she stopped. Looking directly toward Daniel sitting quietly in the front row, she admitted something that surprised everyone. She confessed that the joke she had made months earlier about marrying, the mechanic had revealed an uncomfortable truth about herself. She had spent years judging people by titles, appearances, and resumes. Daniel had reminded her that greatness often wears ordinary clothes. The audience erupted into applause. Daniel looked embarrassed. Recognition had never been his goal. Victoria then announced something nobody expected. Sinclair Automotive would build a national training academy completely free for young adults from low-income families. Students would receive education, housing, meals, mentorship, and guaranteed interviews after graduation. The academy would bear only one name, the Emily Carter Institute. Daniel stood frozen. Emily's name appeared across the massive screen behind the stage. His late wife's photograph slowly faded onto the display. Years earlier, Emily had once told him that if they ever became successful, she wanted every child to have the opportunity to chase dreams without worrying about money. Victoria had somehow discovered that conversation through Emily's journal entries Lily had shared with her. Daniel couldn't hold back the tears. For the first time since Emily's funeral, those tears weren't born from grief. They came from gratitude. Construction began almost immediately. Daniel personally helped design every workshop. Instead of polished showrooms, he requested classrooms that looked like real garages. Instead of expensive decorations, he wanted practical tools. Instead of luxury offices, he insisted on comfortable spaces where students could gather, encourage one another, and never feel ashamed of where they came from. His philosophy was simple. Skills build careers. Character builds lives. The first class welcomed 100 students. Some had grown up in foster care, others had dropped out of school. Several had criminal records as teenagers. Many believed society had already given up on them. Daniel saw something entirely different. He saw potential. Every morning he reminded them that engines don't care about someone's past. They only respond to patience, understanding, and persistence. People, he believed, weren't very different. Meanwhile, Victoria found herself visiting the academy more often than her own executive office. Watching students rebuild engines with smiles on their faces gave her a satisfaction that billion-dollar contracts never had. She slowly became part of Daniel and Lily's small world. Weekend lunches turned into family traditions. Holiday dinners became shared celebrations. Lily especially enjoyed Victoria's company. For the first time in years, the house that had once echoed with silence now echoed with laughter again. Months passed. Friendship slowly became trust. Trust quietly became affection. Neither Daniel nor Victoria rushed it. Life had already taught both of them how fragile happiness could be. One autumn afternoon, Lily asked a question that left both adults speechless. She wanted to know whether it was acceptable to love someone new without loving her mother any less. Daniel gently held his daughter's hand. He explained that love never replaces love. A new sunrise doesn't erase yesterday's sunset. It simply brings another chance to see light. Victoria wiped away tears as she listened. She realized Lily wasn't asking for herself. She was giving both adults permission to stop feeling guilty about being happy again. Another year passed. The Emily Carter Institute expanded into 5 different cities. Graduates found jobs across the automotive industry. Several started their own repair businesses. One former student even patented an environmentally friendly engine component inspired by Daniel's teaching. Reporters repeatedly called Daniel a genius. He always corrected them. He insisted that talent means very little unless it is shared. His greatest invention, he joked, wasn't an engine, it was hope. Then came another unforgettable day. The very Porsche that had changed everything returned to the showroom. Its elderly owner had passed away peacefully. According to his will, the historic vehicle wasn't to be auctioned or displayed in a museum. Instead, it was donated to the Emily Carter Institute. Inside the glove compartment lay an envelope addressed to Daniel. His hands trembled as he opened it. The letter explained that Professor Michelson had secretly sold one prototype years earlier to protect it from being destroyed after the laboratory fire. The collector had promised never to reveal its history until the right moment. He believed Daniel would someday find it. The old man wrote one final sentence. Some machines preserve history. Others restore destiny. Daniel folded the letter carefully. He looked toward the students gathering around the legendary Porsche. Instead of seeing an expensive sports car, they saw possibility. That was exactly how Professor Michelson would have wanted it. The restored Porsche became the centerpiece of the academy, not because of its value, but because it reminded every student that extraordinary stories often begin with ordinary people refusing to give up. Eventually, on a quiet spring evening, Daniel and Victoria returned to the same luxury showroom where they had first met. The building looked almost unchanged. The polished floors still reflected the lights. Luxury cars still lined the room, but both of them had changed completely. Victoria smiled as she remembered her old joke. This time there was no audience, no employees, no reporters, only 2 people whose lives had unexpectedly crossed because of one broken engine. She admitted she had once believed success meant being admired. Daniel had taught her that real success means being useful. Daniel looked around the empty showroom before quietly taking something from his jacket pocket. It wasn't an expensive diamond. It wasn't even new. It was Emily's old silver necklace. He explained that before Emily passed away, she had asked him to one day give it to someone who loved Lily as much as she did. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. She accepted the necklace not as a replacement for Emily, but as a promise to honor her memory forever. Several months later, surrounded by academy students, mechanics, neighbors, and children whose lives had been transformed through the Institute, Daniel and Victoria exchanged wedding vows. The ceremony wasn't held in a luxury hotel. It took place inside the first training workshop Daniel had built. Grease-stained toolboxes stood beside flower arrangements. Old engines decorated the walls. Laughter filled every corner. Lily proudly walked her father down the aisle before hugging Victoria tightly. No one present cared about wealth or titles. They celebrated something much greater. 2 broken hearts had found the courage to heal. Before we reach the end of this incredible journey, we'd like to ask one small favor. If this story moved you, reminded you never to judge someone by their appearance, or gave you hope that second chances really do exist, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs encouragement today. And before the final words, leave a comment saying, "Kindness always finds its way home." Your message may inspire someone reading the comments who feels like giving up. Years later, visitors entering the Emily Carter Institute always stopped beside the famous white Porsche displayed in the entrance hall. Its engine remained exactly as Daniel had repaired it that unforgettable day. A small bronze plaque beneath it carried these words: "Never judge a person by the clothes they wear, the job they do, or the car they drive." Sometimes the hands covered in grease are the same hands capable of rebuilding broken dreams. Students often asked Daniel whether the story about the CEO joking, "Fix my Porsche and I'll marry you," was really true. He always smiled before answering. "The joke was real," he would say, "but the miracle wasn't that someone fixed a Porsche." He would pause and look toward Lily and Victoria laughing together nearby. "The real miracle was that a broken man opened the hood and found his life waiting for him inside." And every time those words were spoken, Everyone listening understood the same timeless truth. The greatest treasures in life are never found beneath the hood of a luxury car. They are found inside hearts willing to believe in kindness, humility, forgiveness, and second chances. Sometimes all it takes is one unexpected moment, one act of compassion, or one person who looks beyond appearances to completely change another person's destiny forever.